Hello and welcome to the Sex Within Marriage podcast. I'm JD, marriage educator, coach, writer, and podcaster. And at uncoveringintimacy.com, we offer a wide range of resources to help couples strengthen intimacy in all areas of their marriage. And in my work as a marriage coach, I often see couples transition from one type of marriage to another. There's no clear line between these states, no set of rules that definitely places someone in one category or the other. Yet, by observing how they handle conflict, express themselves, interact in small ways, you can tell which state their marriage is in. And a big part of my job as a coach is to help people shift from one type of marriage to another, as most issues in marriage are resolved by doing so. Today, we're going to talk about these two states. But before we get to that, I just want to remind the wives out there that we have a webinar coming up this Sunday at 8 p.m. Eastern Time. It's for all of you who want to learn to be more sexually engaged in your marriage. If you ever said, I want to have sex, but you don't really want to. If you feel like you have sex for him. If you said something like, all you want me for is sex, or all you think about is sex, or all you want is sex, or anything like that, this is the webinar for you. Or if you just want to learn more about your husband and yourself and how God made you to be a sexual being, this is helpful for you too. It's about an hour long. We'll have a Q&A afterwards, and I guarantee you will learn more in this hour and a half than in probably anything else you're going to show up to this year about your marriage. And it's free. So there's a link in the show notes. There's a banner on the website too. You can just go there, click on it, and sign up for free. So back to these marriage dynamics. When we first get married, we are often full of hormones that help keep us feeling infatuated, especially if you waited to have sex until marriage. We think we're being selfless because we do anything for our spouse, but the truth is we're really just enjoying how it makes us feel. Every smile, every laugh that they give, or even act of service that we do for them feels amazing, and we love that feeling. But eventually it wears off. The honeymoon period fades, and we realize that doing the dishes, making the bed, or even having sex for our spouse doesn't feel amazing anymore. That's when our selfishness starts to show. It wasn't about them. It was only about how it made us feel. Most don't realize this though. They just feel like they've fallen out of love, or they blame their spouse for not being like they were in the beginning of their relationship. And of course, that's quite possible, as their spouse may no longer be infatuated with them either. And so perhaps they're feeling the same way. This shift happens at different times for everyone. Often spouses don't reach this point simultaneously, which can also lead to a conflict. One spouse may still feel infatuated while the other one doesn't, causing more confusion and hurt. In truth, neither spouse has truly learned how to love selflessly yet. And over time, we often slip into a rules-based approach to marriage, which can feel transactional. We start thinking, well, if I'll do X, then you'll do Y for me. I often hear wives say, I should have sex with him more because he's a good husband and does X, Y, and Z for me. Marriage becomes a trade-off. This is why advice and jokes about compromise are so common. It's everywhere. We create rules and protocols to act loving when we don't feel like it. Not because we want to love, but because we fear the other person will stop doing things for us. Often these rules act in the same way that the recommended daily allowance, the RDA, for minerals and vitamins were set initially. They were not designed for optimal living, but rather to stave off some disease. For example, the original RDA for vitamin C was set at a level that below it, people tended to get scurvy, and above it, they didn't. It doesn't mean they operate effectively at that level, only that you'll avoid some serious diseases that you may get if you're below that level. And often people approach marriage in the same way as the original RDA standards. They ask questions like, how much sex are people having per week? Or how much sex should I be having per week? Because if they're at or above that amount, then they feel like they've done their job. They've passed the test. And in some way, the same way as the old RDA standards, yes, if you're having sex once a week, which is the average in many of my surveys, then you will likely stave off some horrible issues in your marriage. But it doesn't mean it's optimal. Because a rules-based marriage often feels more like a business relationship than a loving partnership. You start to feel like roommates rather than lovers. Your relationship becomes about checking off tasks, exchanging favors, and keeping score. Conversations revolve around schedules, grocery lists, repairs, and finances. Sex becomes routine or maybe even efficient, and expressions of appreciation and gratitude start to fade away. When this happens, you are firmly in a rules-based marriage. It's legalistic, not loving. You're trying to act loving, but the rules, not the love, are driving the relationship. This is when people often start to wonder, is this all there is? Is it just going to be like this for the rest of our lives? This relationship dynamic is when affairs happen, often because someone comes by who is infatuated with them. They get infatuated and suddenly everything is exciting and new. And then they feel loved and loving. They think, this is what I've been missing. This is what it should be like, not realizing that it's actually a step backwards. If the relationship continues, it will just end up in the same place. Now, not everyone has an affair, of course. Most marriages don't involve affairs, contrary to some's belief. There has to be opportunity. Not everyone has that. And the opportunity has to be recognized as well. And of course, there has to be a willingness to take the opportunity. Some who would have cheated never got the opportunity, and some who got the opportunity didn't recognize it, and some had the opportunity, recognized it, and chose to keep their vows. But the longer you stay in this dynamic, the harder that choice becomes. And people break out of this dynamic in a few ways. Some get closer to God, and that in turn changes their stance on their relationship. As you grow closer to God and learn about love, eventually, if it's genuine, it will spill out into the rest of your life. It can't not do so. If you think you're a good Christian with a good relationship with God, but it doesn't carry over into your marriage, then you're fooling yourself. Maybe everyone else too, but not your spouse, and certainly not God. They will see the facade for what it is. That doesn't mean you have to have a good marriage. It takes two people after all, but it doesn't mean that you should be a good spouse if your relationship with God is good. Now, some realize they're not happy, and rather than run from the situation, they double down. They choose to do the loving things even when it's not fair, when it's not being reciprocated, and when they don't feel like it. They choose to love for the sake of loving the other person. It's a risky move because by the very nature of self-sacrificial love, there is no guarantee that it will be reciprocated. You may end up loving someone who doesn't return it to you. But that's a relatively rare case as far as I can see. In most cases, the choice of selfless love inspires the other spouse. It most likely won't be immediate, but it tends not to lag too far behind. Sometimes it can take years, but that's also relatively rare. I don't often see couples where one is being selfless and the other is selfish. I think I saw that only once in the last decade that I can recall, and there were some mental illness issues at play there as well. Now, there are some people who think that they're being the selfless one and the other one's being selfish, but usually that self-deception doesn't last long after you start talking with them. And then in some cases, spouses do make that leap together. This leap usually happens through some event. They read a book that encouraged it together and they took up the challenge together, or they had a conversation about it and chose to do it simultaneously. Or what I most often see is that they start coaching, usually for some other reason, and in trying to resolve the issue they came to coaching for, I try to lay out a framework for a better way, and they take it up together. And these usually aren't light switch moments either. It's not like one day they were one way and the next day they were the other. Instead, it's a slow process of reinventing yourself, reprogramming your mind, changing your habits, and building a new mindset. I often, in calls, get to see them think one way, catch themselves sometimes, and then reframe it in the moment. And I love it when I can watch that happen in real time. It involves practice and setbacks, and we actually use rules and protocols to help build those habits, because when you're in a rules and protocol mindset, they can work when leveraged appropriately. We use it to train the brain to act how we want it to, with the goal of not needing the rules and protocols, because the behaviors will eventually naturally come out of love and experience. For example, one of the first homework assignments I give to many couples is complimenting each other. Now, if they have a really hard time with this, then the goal is to compliment each other once a week. Most people, I start at once a day. It's a rule or a protocol, but it builds a mindset. It trains your brain to see positives in your spouse, because you can't compliment things that you don't see. And when you have a goal of complimenting them daily and you're not allowed to make repeats, then your brain has to train itself to notice positive things in your spouse, which will in turn make it easier to be loving towards them. Eventually, it becomes second nature, because they're not doing it to get something back. They're just doing it because they've chosen to be loving. It may or may not yield results in their spouse, but it will help them change their own mind. And that's the answer to having fantastic marriage. Be loving for the sake of being loving. It sounds simple, but getting there can be difficult. I'm still in the process myself. Looking back, I'm far better at it than I used to be, but I'd be lying if I said I had adopted it wholeheartedly. This is the work of a lifetime that I will never finish. Now, the good thing is that you don't have to wait until you're done to reap the benefits. As you improve, your life improves. Sometimes just because your disposition does. You learn to be more content in all circumstances. Then, eventually, the circumstances tend to shift better as well. The problem is that it's not a promise. There's no guarantee that your spouse will follow or that your circumstances will improve. And that's the hard part, choosing to do it without a guarantee. But that's also how it needs to be, because if it was guaranteed, it would just be another legalistic agreement of I will do X for you and you will do Y for me. However, an incredible thing happens if both spouses adopt this stance of loving sacrificially. You actually get more of what you want. Now you have a spouse doing their best to meet your needs and supply some of your wants, just as you do for them. You no longer have to have conversations of compromise, but rather those of mutual satisfaction. Rather than fighting for your desires, you fight for your spouses. That way, if you win, they also win, and vice versa. You don't frame things as compromises, or if I do X for you, you'll do Y for me, where you both have to water down what you want to make it palatable for the other spouse. Instead, you reframe it as, I would like to do X for you. If you did Y for me, that would make it easier. Then your actions aren't contingent on theirs. Whether or not they reciprocate, you still intend to do something for them. But if they do whatever it is, it's going to make it easier. Chances are it's going to make it even better for both of you. And this sacrificial love is how you live a marriage of love rather than focusing on compromises, rules, protocols, and other legalistic frameworks to keep things going. Now, that's easy to say, but harder to live. But I'd say try it out. If you need help putting this into practice, let me know, and I'd love to coach you through it. I've seen lots and lots of couples make this leap together and go from struggling to living the kind of marriage God wanted them to have. And I would love to see you have that kind of marriage too. And that's all I wanted to talk about today. Again, if you're a Christian wife, check out the webinar. We're going to talk more about how to make an amazing marriage and what you can do from your side. And that's it for today. We'll talk to you next time.